your choice to start to panic. It's you are choosing to elevate your heart rate at a time that's not needed. You're making the choice to make this harder.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Casazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest is a retiring Green Beret who has served our country for 27 years. He's been through a life of trauma and war, starting at childhood, where he was the victim of abuse, driving him to attempt suicide at the age of 12. He is an incredible TED Talk that I recommend everyone go watch on YouTube. His story of trauma to triumph, and I am beyond excited to talk with him today on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to the show, Trevor Beaman. Trevor, welcome to the show.
Hey, Gina, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to kind of talk about the mindset stuff that you are continuing on and having a conversation about. I think there's a lot of things that we can discuss that can help a lot of people. So thank you so much. But
Yeah.
quick note there, I've only been in the Army for 23 years, not 27.
23.
That's cool.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
cool.
I said
No
24.
worries.
All right. I'm a year off. My
Okay.
apologies. Thanks for clarifying. I want to ask you, as someone who went through a life of childhood of trauma at such a young age, did you feel like that helped build resilience in you? I know you talk about compartmentalizing and not dealing. How did it help you to get through something like Special Forces?
The childhood resiliency building, there is a concrete thought process that's developed that I won't ever be able to have something bad happen to me like that again. So to go into Special Forces training, I was like, no one's going to touch me or hurt me the ways that my stepfather did in the Army. It's not possible for that to happen. And so I never believed that it would ever get that bad. And I would just tell myself when I was tired and hungry and when I was like suffering inside from all the things that we were doing, I would just reflect back to being a kid and say that it's not that bad. So keep going.
And you mentioned you went back to childhood, be like, it's not that bad. Was there ever a time where it was like on the brink, like it was like really, really hard for you, where you were struggling with maybe quitting or anything like that? Or you were like, no, nothing that hit my childhood is even going to come close to touching this?
The only time that I've ever thought about quitting was when I was at dive school. And there is a portion of this, of the school that is called life-saving techniques. As an instructor, we call it life-changing techniques. And it is an event that you're in a pool, that you are essentially wrestling with an instructor, and you're trying to get their body to the side of the pool and get them out. You are saving a victim in the pool. This event put my heart rate so high, and I was so exhausted that as I look to over my right shoulder, there's the bell there, right? And I look at the bell and I said, all of this will be done. I can just get out of the pool, ring the bell, and I'll go home and it'll be all done. And there's for the split second, I said, no, I can do it. And I will swim away. I'll get my heart rate down. I'll breathe deep and I'll reattack the situation, and got through it. And so that's really the only time that I've had in training where I was like, I'm done with this. I don't want to do this anymore. And so that's what ended up happening.
So I was actually listening to one of your interviews where you talk about dive school, and you talked about it's all about like that's the mind, like going through that school, that's the mind over the physical. Is that correct?
Correct.
So what part of I guess your training, did dive school happen? Like, where was this along your career?
So I was already a Green Beret. I had graduated in 2009, and I ended up going to dive that at that time. This is my second time at dive school. Uh, it was 2013. So I'd already been a Green Beret for almost 4 years at this point. And
Why was
already
it your
two.
second time?
So my first time, I made some really bad decisions, and I got down to Key West, and instead of like taking care of myself and sleeping and getting rest, I went down to Duval Street for 3 nights straight and drank really hard. And so when it came to the physical entrance exam to get into the school, I felt the 7 strict pull-ups that you have to do, and I was a day one drop from the school. And there was a lot of lessons learned from that moment that I needed in my life. That success after success, and I thought that I was untouchable. I had this mentality that I was bigger than everyone else, that I could never fail anything, and I needed this setback in my life so that I could switch my mind back into thinking that yes, even me can fail at something, and you need to still work hard. And so then I went back home. I did another combat deployment to Afghanistan. And while I was there, I really thought about like this will never happen to me again. I will never fail again. I will not set myself up for failure ever again.
How did it feel like the moment you couldn't complete, like in that very very moment when you hit that point of failure? Like, what did that feel like for you?
Hmm. So that was in 2012. So that's like 10 years ago that I think
Like,
I
was it
just
more anger? Was it like frustration within yourself? Was it frustration within choices? Was it like, more self-loathing? Like, was there anything in terms of like those types of feelings? Or was it just like a
I
comeback?
I I I think there's two parts to this. I think that there's one where I believe that I wasn't ready to be there. And so I think it gave me an out from the school so that I wouldn't have to suffer further on. And it's a scary place. And so I feel like it was like, all right, I don't have to face that pool just yet. This is a very physically demanding school. And I was like, I was not ready. And so I was happy that it kind of actually happy that it happened to me because I wasn't ready to be there. And the school did it what it was supposed to do is to find out the guys that didn't do enough to prepare themselves to be there, and it weeded me out. Uh, but I also took on the responsibility that this was my um, this was what I chose to choose what happened to me. It wasn't an instructor. It wasn't anything else. It wasn't the school. There wasn't someone there that like was like trying to get rid of me or making up some other excuse of why I didn't pass. I chose to say it was me, and also to kind of see that, this might be the right thing because I was not physically prepared to be there.
You said something really interesting. You said, was kind of happy about it, because like you weren't
Mhm.
ready for it. Now, I know that feeling very well. Where you're like, oh, thank God that happened because I don't know, I wasn't ready to handle what was to come, right? So you had, I'm assuming, like two ways of going at it, where like did you have, I'm assuming again, like you didn't have to go to dive school a second time, like you chose to be there, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of us, like when we have that, like, oh, thank God that happened to me, I didn't have to face that. We have that choice to never go there and never face it, right? So what made you go back to face it? What made you want to go back for round two?
I think there's a lot of instilling of grit and that I can be better. There's those two things is I can achieve something I'm going to set my mind to go do. But there's another aspect of it that's super important is that the guys that went to Afghanistan that were the best guys were divers. And I like emulate, I wanted those to be those heroes that went and did that. That was the epitome of what a Green Beret is that you have a long tab plus you got a bubble. And if you got those two things, like you are looked at by your peers, by leaders as a totally different soldier and Green Beret. And I desired to be looked at like that.
That's really it's in. So how did you then build up? Like, what was the time period from when you didn't when you left for dive school number one to get to dive school number two, right? For round two of it. And then
Mhm.
what was the process to prepare for it? And I want to know physically and I want to know mentally because you mentioned like a lot of it is mental.
The first time is July 2012, and then I go back again October of 2013. So it's about 15 months difference. We go through this maritime assessment course or pre-scuba, and it's about 2 weeks, 3 weeks long that we do all of the events that you end up doing in the pool. And there's a lot of surface swims where you're just finning in the water. And then there's a lot of stress events and things that are going on during that time. Uh, so I was more committed the second time than I did it the first time. The pool and stuff wasn't that bad. It didn't swimming and holding my breath didn't seem that hard. The second time, the stress events and all of the training that the instructors were doing was different. They had different instructors and the approach was different. And I was going with some of my teammates or that were there too. So there's a different peer pressure level the second time. And I really was focusing on I'm going to do the best that I possibly can. I'm going to give it 100%, a lot more than what I was doing before. Before I was just going through like pure talent and not really giving it extra. Like that's probably the difference. I think that I ends up happening at two separate times.
Um, for something like this, well, for someone like I'm terrified of the water, terrified. So when we had to go and lay down into the swell and like do sit-ups and push-ups, I mean, like my coach said to me, he's like, I saw the light go out in your eyes when
Mm.
when that happened. Like it's terrifying. And I can't even imagine like going through what you go through at dive school and going to a point of like you're at like the last breath of oxygen and you still have to be
Mhm.
relaxed. How
Mhm.
how do you train for that? How do you calm your mind for that? Like how does that? I'm fascinated by that.
Mm. So the use of apnea training, right? So learning how to hold your breath,
Mhm.
first of all, and getting that at a decent size that you can hold your breath for 2 to 3 minutes. That's one. Two, being cardiovascular fit helps enormously for you to be able to do that. Following the instructions of the instructors helps as well. So if you do what they say, it reduces the time that you might not have something oxygen to breathe on or air. The other part is what what are you thinking about when things get stressful and you don't like holding your breath? So a technique that I did is that I learned a song, right? I learned an Elton John song, um, Blowing in the Wind, and I would think about my wife and my daughter to be born, and I would swim underwater thinking about them, thinking about this song, and I would just repeat this song in my head while I was underwater. And so I wasn't focused on all the bad and all the hard things that was happening. I was thinking about something else. Like, you could say it's a mindfulness tool in a way to kind of detach my brain from the situation that I was going through. And it helped me be able to traverse some of these underwater events because I just put myself in a different place and that was peaceful to me. Uh, so I think the biggest thing is just to be able to relax. And I know that's easy to say, just relax. But the more you tense up, the more your body's using oxygen, and the more you think about stuff, the more that your brain is consuming all of this oxygen. So the more you can learn the tasks to make it muscle memory, the less you think about it. And the less you think about it, the less oxygen you use, and it becomes easier.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by my absolute favorite company. If you know me or seen videos or photos of me, then you know I always have one on my wrist. I absolutely adore this company. DiscoverOmnia.com. DiscoverOmnia.com is the world's first smart crystal bracelet. Every single bracelet is handmade in the USA using real, genuine crystals made on memory wire. Every bracelet is unisex, and they're also aromatherapy. The cool part is the black onyx charm that is on the bracelet. It scans to your cell phone, connecting you to their Wellness Hub Elevate. You can also access their Wellness Hub Elevate on your computer or tablet. You just have to sign into your account. The bracelet gives you a 12-month membership. It has over 200 pieces of self-care content, from motivational tips, meditations, breathing exercises, exercises around the theme of your bracelet, printable journals, and so much more. The content is ever growing. And that's not all. The bracelet also gives you lifetime access to their Elevate Together Club, which meets monthly via Zoom. Each month is themed to give you actionable takeaways to elevate your life. And with this podcast episode, you get 40% off your purchase order by using the code Mindset Podcast. Use that code Mindset Podcast for 40% off. Just go to DiscoverOmnia.com. DiscoverOmnia.com, code Mindset Podcast for 40% off. Get your bracelet today. You mentioned, getting to the point of relaxing and having those tactics. What point did you was that taught to you? Did you learn that? Like, was it, especially like coming through such a abusive childhood and everything that you went through? I mean, you mentioned you compartmentalized a lot, but was there ever moments, especially going through all the different training that you had to go through to be a Green Beret and all the stress that's being induced on you, where you had to just learn to relax?
The repetition of things is how I was able to relax. So I could see that I was accomplishing these events. And the more and more times I did the events, the more and more I was teaching myself that it's your choice to start to panic. It's you are choosing to elevate your heart rate at a time that's not needed. You're making the choice to make this harder. And so being in that environment where you want to breathe really hard, and you want to just be like, I'm done with this, being able just to push just a little bit every day, like I'm going to hold my breath for just a little bit longer, allows you to start to internalize that you can do this. And so the more times that you complete the task and push just a little bit further past being hypoxic in that feeling, is when you start to see that it's not that bad. So getting comfortable with feeling shitty is really key. If you can continue to push past that threshold every single day, at some point that threshold is so far to be achievable again that you'll never reach that wall.
Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. A lot of Special Forces training is all being uncomfortable. How did you train for getting to Special Forces?
So I was living in Indiana at the time, and I was just graduated from Purdue. And I decided that I was going to spend time doing various exercises, running, biking, swimming, and rucking. And I essentially just said, I'm going to spend an hour running a day. I'm going to spend an hour swimming, an hour biking, and an hour rucking. Over the time from January to April when I left to go on active duty, I just increased those times. And so I was just conditioning myself to move my body for long periods of time. And I felt that's all I needed to be able to be comfortable doing is carrying weight for time and running for an undisclosed amount of miles and for time. And that's what I just kind of worked on is what am I gonna, I'm not gonna listen to music or anything like that. I'm just gonna just be with myself through all of those type of training events. And I just figured out how to like talk to myself and come up with a story and think about what the future might be and reflect on the past and just be happy, like not to think about the pain of what my muscles felt like or what my feet felt like or being cold in the water. I just take your mind to somewhere else and be happy being there.
Sitting with yourself and being with yourself, you tend to learn a lot about yourself. And one thing that you said in an interview that I thought was really interesting was you put a lot of effort into who you are, like who you are today versus who you were and where you've come from. When did you decide? I mean, obviously through training, you decided to before training, as you were getting ready, you decided to learn how to sit with yourself. How uncomfortable were some moments for you, especially because of what you went through during that your childhood and everything?
I knew I wanted to be a Green Beret. I had this fire inside me that pushed me to go to become this. When I was in rehab, I was given a choice of you can medically retire or you can stay in. And at that point, reality kind of like sank into me is that I'm not going to be in the army forever. And I needed to find something, develop something that ignited that same fire in me that sent me to go to SFAS to become a Green Beret. And I was lucky enough, like while I was at rehab, to come to the epiphany of the story that I have, the things that I've been through, that there's value there, that there is something offered that people need to hear that can help them heal themselves. And at that point, so this is September of 2019, I was like, I know exactly what's the next fire inside me because I saw the impact of the way that I talk affected people. And that is the same thing that same fire to become a Green Beret is that I was able to affect people's lives and I wanted to do the same thing. It's just in a different way.
So it was always kind of like to help people.
Yeah. There's a story that goes with that is that
Please. Yeah.
when I was 16 years old, I talk about this in the TED Talk as well, that I suspected my stepfather of abusing other children. And these children had been diagnosed with autism, and another child had Down syndrome. And at that moment, I embodied this, free the oppressed, the motto of Special Forces, that these people can't stand up for themselves and speak out. And I couldn't let that happen to somebody. I had to stand and speak from the mountains that this person was doing it because I felt so strongly that he was doing this to these other children. And so at that, I was 16 years old, and at that moment, I knew that I was gonna try and help people for the rest of my life.
What you went through and then going through being in combat and everything, um
Mhm.
it's traumatic. it's all traumatic, all of it. And you dealt with it very differently. You dealt with it through opiates and other forms of, that was your form of coping and Valium and stuff. And want to kind of get to like the you put a lot of effort into who you are now versus who you were. So as you were doing like drugs to help you cope with life and what was going on, how would have you done it differently? Or how did that affect your performance and who you were versus today? Does that make sense?
I think I kind of know what you're saying here. So the use of drugs and alcohol is an easy way to deal with trauma, but it doesn't heal it. What I know today is that using breathing, using mindfulness, talking about what happened, expressing the feelings that I have inside about what I just saw and what I just did changes that need to fix those traumatic events with substances. Because instead of running from the problems, I started to go head on to them. And I am going to work on that event, those feelings, rather than masking them with substances. Because the use of drugs and alcohol doesn't fix anything. And I needed to see that I had the ability to use my mind and body so that I wouldn't need the use of drugs and alcohol anymore. And it wasn't something that I was ever taught until I went to rehab, and I was taught these different exercises and different things and journaling and visualization stuff, and being able to put myself at peace by not using something else. Because this doesn't the it's a trap. And I know I talk about that, like, because it really screws up everything when you don't use the proper skills.
When did you decide to start talking about it? Like, was it like, I know a lot of people that go into special forces, they come from traumatic childhoods and stuff. Was it like, is it something that you guys talk about, like getting to know each other and all that stuff? Or like you decide to talk about, like, at one point, were you like, I got to deal with this, or I'm going to talk about it and share?
Ooh. Oh man. This was after my third suicide attempt when I was down in Key West, that I almost died on a dive. And uh, I had gone to the VA and they had diagnosed me with alcohol abuse disorder. So they said I was an alcoholic. And so at that point, I had a disorder on my dive physical, and I was told that I would have to go to rehab so that I would have like a treatment on the record so that I can continue to dive. I got hurt on a dive, and I was like, I can't dive anymore, so I'm done. I don't need to go to rehab. And the doctor that was down there uh, essentially says, Trevor, you have a big problem here. You need to go get help. And at that moment is when I truly realized that there's something going on, that I need to go get help. So that's what drove me to really realize that I needed to change the way that I was coping with trauma, coping with stress. And it was like, aha, like someone else is saying that they see that I need to get help.
Getting help. That's a really, really big step. You mentioned earlier, like you saw that bell for a hot second in dive school, and for a second it felt really good, but you made that choice to go through the pain, to push through and get to the end, right? So were there ever moments throughout your rehabilitation where you like wanted to go back to like the old coping skills that you had where things were just too challenging to deal with?
I was so afraid that alcohol was going to kill me that I fought it on and on again. But the biggest shift that I've had from drinking was removing this label of that I'm an alcoholic and adding the label of non-drinker. That holds better to me. It's just that I identify as a non-drinker and I don't label myself as an alcoholic. And that totally changed the who I how I felt about myself because looking at myself as an alcoholic crushed me as a person because I felt I was broken again. And I don't like that kind of thinking of myself as a broken person. So that's a big shift that happened. So there wasn't any real big moment where I'm like, I I'm struggling with substance abuse. There wasn't really anything that happened like that. I There was more of being treated by other drinkers differently was a bigger thing. But I had friends in my life that were still drinking that still accepted me because I said, I don't mind if you drink around me. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't make me have a desire to drink. But some people just were not comfortable drinking in front of me. And so there were some people in my life that I lost as friends because they weren't comfortable drinking around me.
How was being in combat and also like taking drugs,
Mhm.
did that ever really like affect you in like such a negative way that that could have been like
Mhm.
really terrible for everybody?
I was really careful about when I was using drugs and certain types of drugs. Um, Diazepam and Valium wasn't really that too much of a problem, I guess, at least the way that I saw myself and felt. I didn't feel like it was hindering my decision process, but it's not true, right? You're still on drugs, you're still not clear of mind. Uh, but shooting up and using intravenous drugs takes a lot of time out of your day. So you're constantly trying to get a fix all the time, and it's really wasteful of what you should be doing. And you are focused on trying to find a substance to make you feel better. Uh, which some heroin addicts and folks like that talk about feeling sick and like having this like real drive to do drugs, and it's strong and it's hard, and I think that that's the thing that was the biggest problem is that I was thinking and wanting always to shoot up and not focus on my job and what I should be doing. So that's I think is the but the I didn't have like a cloudy brain when using this stuff. It doesn't work that kind of way.
Was there something that happened to you that triggered going that route instead of a journaling, mindful breathing route?
I don't know if we lost some A&A or there was the stress of like, being out at this checkpoint for 30 days at a time, or if I was just like morally starting to break down, and I felt as if I didn't have any feelings left inside my body. So the drugs were made me feel that I felt that I had lost my soul from like going on missions and taking lives. The morality piece of it started to kind of erode in me. And the feelings of being human the feelings of like the self-love was being eroded. So the use of drugs gave me a sense of warmth and a spike in the way that I thought about myself and the way that I felt.
You mentioned in an interview, you said something in your brain changes, from where you are today. How did it work for you in terms of changing your brain to a more mindful way of being, if that makes sense?
So the catalyst to this is I go do ketamine in Chicago and at a clinic there. And during the very first infusion, I say to myself, you're worth living. Your body's worth taking care of, and you must nourish your body and take care of your body. And I think at that point, I finally realized that instead of worrying about everything else in the world to take care of, that I actually need to start taking care of me. And that I am the only person that matters in the world first. Because if I'm not okay, nothing else around will be okay. So I have to work on getting me better before I can make anything else better.
Okay, I gotta ask this then. You mentioned earlier in the interview that you came forward about your stepfather when you found out that, or when you suspected that he was abusing other kids. If you never suspected that, would you have come forward or said anything?
I don't know. I think the idea of someone else being hurt
Mhm.
was more powerful than me being hurt.
And now knowing what you know with that treatment where you said I got to take care of me, is that answer different?
Yes, 100% for sure. And I think it would have been years and years earlier.
Well, we didn't talk about it yet. I heard you talk about it in an interview about learning how to be less reactive. What do you have that taught you to be a less reactive person? Was it through anything through training? Was it after training? Was it in combat, after combat?
Two pieces, training and combat. So through training, we're continuously taught to let the environment develop. Take some time, take a tactical pause, take a breath, see what's going on. So that's in training, is that we see things go too fast, or maybe we see things go too slow. And how do you make a good decision? In combat, when a truck blows up in front of you by an IED and you see it, your hands are shaking, you're all the thousand things of what could possibly have gone wrong are flashing through your brain. Are my friends dead? How are we gonna get on with our day? Like, what's next? Are there other people shooting at me? Are you know, how are we gonna get a helicopter here to save all these guys? And I'd see it all and I would just stop and listen and take a huge breath and say, we're going to get through this. Let's watch what's going on for a second. And then have that repeated and repeated again. And so moving into my life now, I just take a second, take a deep breath, let your heart rate go down, and really open up the aperture about what's happening all around you before you make a step forward or say something or start to react. So it's becomes a lot more decisive decision making because you took the right amount of time to analyze what's going on so that you can make a clear decision about how you're going to act.
When you first started learning this and training, how uh, how how long did it take you to get to that point?
Hmm. So the memory that I have of this happening is at SEER school. And at SEER school, they put you in these rooms where they interrogate you. And you got to be quick on your feet to make a decision about how you're going to respond to a question. And the best way that they have to help move this process along is through pain. And so they every once in a while you get slapped in the face when you're trying to answer questions. And so they're trying to ingrain this quick thinking, how to, manipulate the situation through words and how to kind of get yourself out of a bad spot. And so that's where I start to really see that, like, I gotta hear what's happening, slow it down, even though I just got hit in the face, and return with an answer that makes sense and that is a viable answer.
Wow. That's really that's it. How I mean, someone slaps me in the face. I mean, that's a hard time to I gotta decompress and not react. Did you ever did you have those moments where you were ready to fight and you had to like reel it in? You like it must have got to a point where you knew, like you were like, okay, were you able to stop yourself? Like it must have got to a point where you know yourself so well, when you're like 2 seconds from reacting, or like point
Yeah.
over from that.
So believe it or not, I'm not really an aggressive kind of person. I haven't really been my whole life. So being hit and stuff didn't trigger things in me. Being hit, like think about having a concussion. Like I'm just like all over everything's getting jumbled up and I can't think straight.
Mm-hmm.
Is what my problem was. It's not that I was angry or I wanted to hit someone. The harder part for me during SEER school, though, is when at the camp I got put into a room and I was being interrogated, and the man was like, "I'm going to pull my pants down, and you are going to perform oral sex on me," and that is the trigger that got me because I was like, "This is you're tired, you're haven't ate, and I'm like so vulnerable." I was like, and everything's flashing through my brain about when I was a kid. I was like, there's no way this is happening to me right now. It's like that's where I felt like I started to internally be like, I can't do this anymore because they have touched a point in me that broke me. And I was like, shit. And it was just like, I just avoided everything. And I got hit so hard that they ended up like dragging me back into the camp and throwing me into the camp. And like my boys had to come pick me up and take care of me. And I was like, I don't know what just happened, but this was really serious and really scary and really emotional for me to have to go through.
In the very beginning, you said, no matter what they do to me, they're not
Mm,
going to get to me from what happened, right? And from my
yeah.
childhood. And then all of a sudden, it's like
Mhm.
fast forward to this moment, and it's like, oh my God, they're going to do exactly what happened to
Mm,
me in my childhood.
yeah.
And now I'm a grown ass man, and there's nothing I can do, right?
Right.
So, gosh, how I mean, you just mentioned it. It was paralyzing. It was absolutely paralyzing for you. How did you recover from that? Like after everyone came, like after your teammates like helped you, and you were able to like kind of process what was happening.
I think it's time and people. I didn't. I think I might have shared that they were asking me to to do this, perform this act with the guys, but I didn't like divulge or like there's something that I had gone through as a kid. And it was just a very obscure thing, and we're all and then maybe I went and sat down and just had a blanket around me, and someone was just there, and I just had a friend next to me, and I was able to sit there for an hour or something, and then we had dinner, and so then I was able to eat some food, and then it's a day and a half later were released. And so it's not a, if it would have been months long, maybe there's a different outcome.
Yeah.
But because of the duration is so short, then it ends. And I could see that I could find hope in having other people there.
Did you think or that having a tough childhood built up resilience for you? Or was it kind of like
Hmm.
what you went through via training and all that stuff that built up that resilience and grit?
At the time, I don't see it like that. I don't see where I lived, what I went through was building a resilience inside of me. I looked at it as like a superpower that I can't be hurt again. Not as it's like it's made me a stronger man because I went through these things as a kid. I didn't see it that way. Now it's different. The perspective on it's changed. That I've what I now see it as is that you went through something really hard and you lived through it, and now that is a thing that you can use to be able to say, I did that, I suffered through it, and I came out better. That's how I look at it now, rather than just saying, I have this awful thing and I use it so I could be successful. I look at this is an awful thing, and then it made me have to work on healing, which now I can use to be successful.
How do you build up resilience
Mhm.
and for your children,
Mhm.
you know, them having a more safe upbringing? Like how do you build up that resilience and grit for them to be prepared to come back from failure?
The discussion about having a voice is deeply ingrained into my children, that they can speak up for themselves. This is one of the things my wife and I have really tried to ingrain into who they are, that they know right and wrong. They know what their body is and what their body is meant to do and who's to touch their body and what's appropriate, not appropriate. Those conversations have been throughout my kids' childhood. That's, I think, the biggest thing. I think the use of their bodies and being strong and seeing that their parents are strong, a conversation about what good food it is, bad food is. Those are those little things about who we are and as a mother and father is what is being seeped into those two kids.
What do you have for like our listeners here, or you know,
Hmm.
most of them are everyday civilians, to help improve their lives and get to a point where they're proud of who they are and to keep striving to be to be better?
I've been thinking about you went through this SEAL training thing. One little acronym that we used about SEAL when we were deployed, it's called sleep, eat, and lift. And if you can hold, hone into those three things, good sleep, beautiful sleep hygiene, you can eat well and good quality foods, and you exercise your body, and you can be phenomenal at those three things, everything else in your life will probably come along with it. So let's be strong people. Let's nourish our bodies. And when our bodies need rest, you get the right amount of sleep.
Wow, thanks. So I really enjoyed talking. This was a really fantastic episode. Thanks for being here and for answering the hard questions.
Yes, ma'am. Of course. Thanks for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. And I really hope that people listening can take something away that's powerful for them and maybe something that they can teach their kids and hold on to for a lifetime. Because I just don't want to do this for, this isn't for you. This is for the audience. This is let's take something away that they can have in their life forever.
100%. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone that's listening. Please like, share, comment, subscribe now, be a Patreon member so you get access to full bonus episodes and extra goodies that only our Patreons get. And tune in next week for our next episode. And